my grandfather's lawyer looked across the conference table at my stepfather and said, "Sir, do you know what position she currently holds?" My stepfather's face went completely still, not angry, not defiant, just still. The way a person goes still when they realize they've made a catastrophic mistake in front of witnesses. I want to tell you that moment felt triumphant. It didn't. It felt like the saddest thing I'd ever seen in a room full of mahogany furniture and framed diplomas. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Audrey. I'm 31 years old. And for most of my life, my stepfather referred to me as your mother's daughter. Never by name, never as his own. Always with that slight pause before the word your that made it clear I was someone else's problem that had followed his wife into his house. My mother married him when I was 7. His name is Stuart, and in the beginning I genuinely tried. I drew him birthday cards. I saved him the corner piece of cake because my grandmother told me that's the piece with the most frosting and everyone secretly wants it. I watched football games with him even though I didn't understand the rules yet, just so I could sit in the same room and feel like maybe we were becoming something. He wasn't cruel. That's the thing people don't understand when I try to explain it. He wasn't a villain in the obvious way. He never screamed at me, never locked me in rooms, never did anything that would make a clear story. He just didn't include me. There's a particular kind of cold that isn't the absence of heat. It's the presence of cold, deliberately maintained. That's what living with Stuart felt like. My grandfather, my mother's father, Harold's father, the man everyone called Pop, was different. Pop lived 40 minutes away in Dayton, in the same house he'd bought in 1971, and he drove a truck that was older than my mother and smelled like motor oil and spearmint gum. Every other Saturday, he'd pick me up and we'd go to the hardware store, which sounds boring, but Pop made everything into a lesson. Not a lecture, a lesson. There's a difference. You see how this bolt is stripped, he'd say, turning it in his hand. Somebody got impatient, rushed it. You can always tell when someone rushed something. It never fits right afterward. He wasn't just talking about bolts. Pop was the one who came to my school plays. Pop was the one who drove 4 hours to watch me receive an award at a regional science competition when I was 15 and my mother couldn't get off work. And Stuart said he had a prior engagement. Pop was the one who sat with me on his back porch the summer after I graduated high school and said, "Audrey, you have a mind that deserves more room than this town can give it. Don't let anyone talk you into staying small." I didn't stay small. I applied to 7 law schools. I got into 4. I chose the one in Philadelphia because it had the clinical program I wanted, working with veterans on benefits claims and discharge appeals. I'd become interested in veterans law the summer I interned at the Legal Aid Clinic in Columbus and spent 3 months helping a 58-year-old Army mechanic fight for disability benefits he'd been entitled to for 11 years. His name was Mr. Cassidy, and he cried when we won. I never forgot that. Law school was 3 years of eating ramen at 11 o'clock at night and reading until my eyes stopped focusing. I graduated in the top 8% of my class. I passed the bar on my first attempt. I got a fellowship that placed me with the Judge Advocate General's Corps as a civilian legal advisor, a role that, over the next 5 years, took me to 3 different duty stations, introduced me to approximately 400 people I would have never met otherwise, and taught me more about human dignity and its absence than any classroom ever could. Pop knew all of this. We talked every Sunday, rain or shine, for the entire time I was in Philadelphia, then Fort Bragg, then San Diego. 30-minute calls usually, sometimes longer. He'd ask about my cases, not the classified stuff, just the shape of the work, what it felt like, whether I thought I was doing good. I always told him yes, even on the days I wasn't sure, because I didn't want him to worry. My mother knew most of it. We had a more complicated relationship. She loved me, I knew that, but she'd learned to exist inside Stuart's preferences, the way you learn to walk in a house with a low ceiling. You stop standing up straight. You forget you used to. Stuart knew almost none of it. By the time I'd finished law school, he'd stopped asking about my life entirely. I'd come home for Christmas, and he'd shake my hand like I was a colleague he barely remembered, and then go back to watching television. My mother would apologize with her eyes from across the room. I stopped expecting anything different. But got sick this spring. I turned 29. Not a slow sick, the fast kind. Pancreatic cancer stage 3, found almost by accident when he went in for what he thought was a gallbladder issue. The doctor said 6 to 18 months. Pop called me that same evening and told me before he told anyone else in the family. I'm not calling to make you sad, he said. I'm calling because you're the one who can handle this information without falling apart. And I need at least one person in my corner who isn't going to treat me like I'm already gone. I took emergency leave and drove to Dayton. I spent a week with him, organized his medications, went with him to his oncologist, sat at his kitchen table while he explained to me what he wanted done with his estate. He'd had a trust drawn up years earlier by an attorney named Mr. Haskell, a careful, precise document that had been updated 3 times since it was first drafted. Pop was not a wealthy man by any conventional measure, but he'd been careful his whole life. The house paid off, a savings account, some investments his own father had left him that had grown quietly over 40 years, a piece of land in rural Indiana that had belonged to the family since the 1940s. He told me what he wanted. He told me who he wanted to have what. He told me, and this is the part that mattered, the part I didn't fully understand until later, that he was naming me executor of his estate. You sure you want to do that? I asked him. Mom might feel your mother is not equipped for this, he said, not unkindly. And frankly, Stuart would find a way to insert himself, and I will not have that. You're a lawyer. You know how to read documents. You know how to hold a line. He looked at me across the kitchen table with those steady gray eyes that I'd looked at my whole life for guidance. I'm trusting you with this because I know you'll do it right. I said yes. He passed 11 months later on a Tuesday morning in February. I was in San Diego. I got the call from my mother at 6:14 a.m. and I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time without moving, looking at the gray light coming through the curtains, thinking about spearmint gum and stripped bolts and a man who made everything into a lesson because he loved me enough to want me to be ready. I flew home 3 days later for the funeral. Stuart met me at the door of my mother's house with the expression of a man who has already decided how things are going to go. He shook my hand, that same handshake, that same mild professional distance, and said they'd spoken with a financial advisor and were exploring options regarding Pop's estate. I nodded. I didn't say anything. I'd learned from Pop that you don't reveal your cards at the door. The reading of the trust was scheduled for the following week at Mr. Haskell's office in downtown Dayton. In the days between the funeral and the reading, Stuart made a series of comments at dinner, in passing, once on the phone when he didn't realize I was in the next room. That made the shape of his thinking clear. He believed the house should be sold and the proceeds split among the surviving family. He referred to the Indiana land as that useless property. He told my mother, in the voice people use when they want to sound reasonable, that given everything, given the distance, given that I had my own life out there, it might make more sense for the family assets to stay with the family. My mother said, "But Audrey's family." He said, "Of course she is," in a tone that meant the opposite. The morning of the reading, I wore my grey suit, the one I wore for federal hearings. I drove separately. Mr. Cardias. Haskell's office was on the 3rd floor of a building that had once been a bank, with high ceilings and tall windows and the kind of solid furniture that says, "This is a place where serious things happen." My mother was already there when I arrived, seated next to Stuart, who was wearing a blazer and had brought, without being invited, his own attorney, a young man named Kevin, something whose card said he specialized in estate planning. Stuart looked at me when I walked in and said pleasantly, "Audrey? Glad you could make it." Like I was late to a family dinner. Like this was optional. I sat down across the table. Mr. Durham? Haskell was in his late 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the unhurried manner of someone who has conducted 1,000 of these meetings and can no longer be surprised by human behavior. He waited until everyone was settled, and then he opened the trust document and placed it on the table. He began with the overview, the structure of the trust, the assets, the basic framework. Stuart's attorney took notes. My mother twisted her hands in her lap. I sat still. Then Mr. Haskell reached the section on the executor. The trust designates an executor responsible for administering the estate, ensuring the terms of the trust are carried out, and serving as the final authority on any disputes regarding interpretation. He looked up. That person is Audrey. Silence. Stuart said, I'm sorry. Your father-in-law named his granddaughter as executor of his estate. That designation was made 4 years ago and reaffirmed in the most recent amendment, dated 14 months ago. Stuart looked at me, then at his attorney, then back at Mr. Haskell. With all due respect, he said, Audrey lives in California. She's not. He paused, choosing words. She's not really positioned to manage something like this. She has her career out there, her own things. It might be more practical for someone local. The trust does not provide for a substitution based on geography, Mr. Haskell said. I understand that, but surely, Stuart. His attorney put a hand on his arm, lightly, the gesture of someone trying to slow down a runaway cart. Stuart ignored him. He turned to me directly, and I saw it, that look I'd watched him give my mother for 20 years, the one that said, I am in charge here, and you will eventually understand that. Audrey, I think we can all agree this is a family matter. Harold would have wanted, my grandfather wanted exactly what he wrote down, I said. My voice was even. That's why he wrote it down. Stuart's attorney leaned over and said something quietly. Stuart's jaw tightened. Mr. Haskell continued. He read to the specific bequests. My mother received the savings account. A cousin in Kentucky received a set of woodworking tools and some furniture. A local church received a designated amount for their food pantry, which was something Bob had apparently arranged years ago without mentioning to anyone. The Indiana land was to remain in the family trust for a period of 10 years before any sale could be authorized, specifically to prevent a quick liquidation. That clause, I later learned, had been added in the most recent amendment. And then there was the house, Pop's house. The one on Elmwood, the one with the back porch and the truck in the driveway and the hardware store receipts still probably in the kitchen drawer, was left to me. Not to my mother. Not to the estate generally. To me specifically by name, with the note in the trust that said, she knows what to do with it. My mother made a small sound. Not quite a gasp, something smaller. Stuart said nothing for a moment. Then, that can't be right. It is precisely right, Mr. Haskell said. Shall I read again? He can't. I mean, she wasn't even. Stuart stopped, started again. She barely visited. She was off doing her own thing. We were the ones here. We were the ones who took him to appointments, who… Stuart! My mother's voice was very quiet. Please stop. He looked at her. He looked at me. He looked at Mr. Haskell. I'd like to know, he said with the controlled tone of someone working hard to sound calm, exactly who your granddaughter is professionally, because I'd like to understand whether there's a conflict of interest in this. Mr. Haskell removed his glasses and set them on the table. I know who she is, he said. Harold made a point of telling me every time we updated the trust. He was quite proud. He looked at Stuart without any particular expression. Do you know what your stepdaughter does for a living? Stuart blinked. She's some kind of lawyer. She is a senior legal advisor to the Judge Advocate General's Corps of the United States Army. She holds a federal security clearance. She has argued cases before the United States Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces. She was, as of last year, selected to represent the United States at an international military law symposium in Brussels. Mr. Haskell put his glasses back on. Harold showed me the program. He kept a copy in his files. The room was quiet. Stuart's attorney was looking at his notepad with the focused attention of someone who has decided not to be in this moment. Stuart himself had gone the particular color that happens when the blood leaves a face not from fear but from something worse. The recognition of a miscalculation so complete that there's no graceful recovery. I didn't look at him with satisfaction. I want to be honest about that. I looked at him and felt something closer to exhausted grief. For my mother, for the 23 years of dinners and holidays and quiet exclusions, for the corner pieces of cake I'd given to a man who'd never once thought to give anything back. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. She didn't say anything. She just held it. Is there anything else you'd like clarified? Mr. Haskell asked the room. Stuart's attorney said quietly, "I think we're done here." In the weeks after, there were logistics. There are always logistics. I flew back to San Diego, submitted paperwork, made calls. Mr. Haskell handled most of the estate administration with practiced efficiency. The house was transferred into my name without incident. I decided not to sell it. I hired a property manager, had some repairs done. The porch had two boards that needed replacing, which Pop had known about and was saving for a weekend project that never came. And now it's rented to a young couple with a 4-year-old daughter who I'm told has already discovered the best climbing tree in the backyard. Pop would have approved. My mother called me about 3 weeks after the reading. It was a Sunday, which is when I always call her, but she called first. "I owe you an apology," she said, "a real one. Not for the house. I don't mean that. I mean for all of it. For a long time. I didn't say you don't have to apologize the way you're supposed to say in movies. I said, I know. Because she did owe me that, and pretending otherwise wouldn't have been honest. And after a lifetime of quietly absorbing the dishonesty of that household, I was done with it. We talked for an hour. It was the best conversation we'd had in years. Stuart sent me an email 2 months after the reading. It was 3 paragraphs and used the phrase, "water under the bridge," twice. I read it, closed the window, and didn't respond. Some bridges don't need the water managed. They just need to be left alone. There's something Pop said to me the last time I visited him, about a month before he died. We were sitting on that back porch, the one with the two boards that needed fixing, and it was cold enough to see your breath, but neither of us wanted to go inside. "People will tell you," he said, "that being quiet means you're weak, that if you don't push back, you're losing." He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, which had a crack in the handle that he'd superglued back together 3 times because he didn't believe in getting new things when old things could be fixed. "But I've watched you your whole life, Audrey. You've always known the difference between the moment to speak and the moment to let the record speak for itself." I thought about that in Mr. Haskell's office. I thought about it when Stuart said she was off doing her own thing and some kind of lawyer, and I didn't correct him, didn't list my credentials, didn't say a word. Because Pop taught me something that took me 20 years to fully understand. You don't have to announce what you are. You just have to be it, clearly and consistently and without apology, and eventually the room will announce it for you. He was right about that. He was right about most things. I still drive out to Dayton a few times a year. I let myself into the house with the key I had made. One of the first things I did after the transfer. And I walk through the rooms and check on things, and sometimes I sit on the back porch if the weather is decent. The tenant's little girl has named the climbing tree, I was told. She calls it Harold. She didn't know him. She doesn't know why she picked that name. Her mom said she just decided one afternoon that the tree needed a name, and that was the name it got. I think Pop would have found that very funny. I think he would have said, "See, some things just know where they belong." I've thought a lot about what Stuart actually lost in that conference room. Not the house. He was never going to get the house. Not the argument. He'd already lost that the day Pope sat at his kitchen table and decided, quietly and without drama, who he could trust. What Stuart lost was the story he'd been telling himself for 23 years. The one where I was peripheral, temporary, someone who drifted out of the frame and wasn't worth tracking. The thing about living as an afterthought in someone else's house is that you have two choices. You can spend your energy trying to make them see you, performing, pushing, asking for a seat at a table that was never going to have enough chairs. Or you can go build something they don't have a chair at all. I chose the second one, not because I was wise at 22, but because I was tired. And sometimes exhaustion leaves you somewhere better than ambition would have. Pop understood something that I didn't fully articulate until I was older. That character compounds. The same way money grows when you leave it alone and let it work, integrity grows when you practice it in small moments that no one is watching. Every time you do the harder right thing instead of the easier wrong one. In a courtroom, in a classroom, in a conversation where you could lie and nobody would know, you are building something. Quietly. Without announcement. Stuart spent those same years assuming the building wasn't happening because he couldn't see it. That's the thing about people who underestimate you. They're usually not paying close enough attention to notice what you're becoming. And the cruelest part is that their inattention is what makes the room so quiet when the record finally speaks. I don't think I'm owed anything for what I went through. A cold childhood doesn't entitle you to a warm ending. But I do think there's a logic to how things unfolded. Not mystical, not cosmic, just the ordinary logic of cause and effect. Pop invested in me. I honored that investment by working hard, by being honest, by showing up. He watched closely enough to trust me with the thing he'd built his whole life. And Stuart, who had never invested in me at all, had no standing in the room when it mattered. That's not justice handed down from somewhere above. That's just what happens when you spend decades choosing consistently who and what you're going to be. My mother held my hand across that table. I think about that a lot. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. After all those years of watching from the other side of the room, she crossed the room. That mattered more than the house, more than any of it. Pop used to say, be it clearly, be it consistently, and let the room announce it for you. I used to think that was patience. Now I think it's something more than patience. It's the kind of confidence that doesn't need an audience because it was never performing in the first place. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this. Not revenge, not the satisfaction of watching someone's face go pale, just the quiet, durable knowledge that the work you do in private will eventually be public record. And the only question is what you want that record to say.